SCOTUS is going to decide whether or not parents have the right to opt their kids out of LGBTQ2IA, all the different alphabet letters, curriculum in their public schools. Also, the libs are still ticked at Bill Maher over his dinner with President Trump, in which he said President Trump is a relatively cool guy that I disagree with. And lastly, a senator pays homage to a gangster, criminal, wife-beating illegal from El Salvador and MS-13 member. All that and more coming up on this episode of Turning Point tonight. My name is Jobob. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. Together, we are charting the course of America's cultural comeback. This is Turning Point tonight. Now, before we get to our panel, the New York Times had an article that I had to bring to you because I didn't know people still thought this way. We all remember COVID, which I know is a ridiculous thing to say, but apparently several people have forgotten how much they lied to the American people, including the New York Times. If you remember, way back when, long time ago, and not that long after the COVID-19 pandemic spread across the country, Jon Stewart went on Stephen Colbert's show and sarcastically and snarkily said effectively, yes, COVID came from a lab. The area that they were studying bat coronaviruses, that's where it came from. And since then, pretty much everybody on our side of the aisle, but even people on the other side of the aisle, have said, yeah, we think that the lab leak is probably the most likely scenario. Now, Dr. Fauci obviously tried to cover that up, and so many scientists have come out and said, no, it's 100% the lab leak theory, including MI6 in Britain, the German intelligence, the CIA, and countless other countries and agencies have said, well, it came from a lab. Now, people who haven't said it comes from a lab is the WHO and China. Other than that, pretty much everyone is in agreement. So because of that, President Trump said that the White House page of information for COVID is going to say, yes, it came from a lab. And that prompted the New York Times to write an article saying, is this actually true? Is this misinformation? This is a legitimate sentence from the article that the New York Times published about President Trump saying the most clear and obvious correct thing. It says this, well, it says he changed the information on the government's website, in the pandemic's origin is so far not backed by direct evidence that has divided intelligence agencies. They also cited it as misleading and contested claims. Well, that's interesting in and of itself. What's also interesting is, well, they didn't need direct evidence when they were talking about the Russian collusion scandal that turned out to be false. They didn't need evidence when President Trump supposedly, which obviously didn't happen, called people suckers and losers to run with that story. And even though they had direct evidence of the Hunter Biden laptop, well, they didn't say anything about that, especially when it was actually happening. The bottom line is, for some reason, the New York Times needs hard evidence. And the only reason we don't have hard evidence is because China destroyed it all. So the problem now is that the lib media is effectively trying to hit President Trump for saying true things. What else is new? Here to comment on that and so much more is Pamela Jean Noble, actress, and Justine Brooks Murray. Both have middle names. Justine is a host for the Media Research Center. Two middle names and a guy who goes solely by his middle names. Guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Justine, I want to start with you here. I guess, again, I wasn't aware that there were people out there still saying, no, it didn't come from a lab. Even some hyper libs who really dislike President Trump have come out and said, yeah, this definitely was probably the most likely case. How is this still a thing that the libs are continuing to question?
Because it's an ideology. Leftism is an ideology that says truth is relative. So they created your truth and my truth. And well, this, of course, is just simply not allowed to be true. So they must keep beating the same worn out drum over and over again, no matter how many federal departments claim otherwise.
Yeah, Pamela, you've got a situation where the lib media doesn't need evidence if the story is damaging or potentially damaging to Trump or the Trump administration. And if they do have evidence, but it's damaging to their side, we're not going to report it. Again, i.e. Hunter Biden's laptop. Do you think they ever learn from this mistake? Because I think in the modern day, we have the internet. We have all of the receipts. We can see what you're doing. You're not gaining any new followers by just flat out lying to people.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the outlets are learning from it. I wouldn't say all. I think there's many that, said it's a conspiracy theory and they're still going off of that. But I think the evidence is stacking up against them. And, the Fauci narrative is a lot of people, obviously, over half of the nation doesn't believe it. And so I think some are just going full steam ahead and saying that, it still is what it is. And then there's other that are backtracking at this point saying we can't fool everybody.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous situation that we found ourselves in. Also, the Wall Street Journal had an article last week about whether or not we should hold Fauci accountable for giving money to the lab that pretty clearly leaked the Chinese bat fever. Speaking of libs doing crazy things, over the weekend, and we didn't film a show when this actually happened, so we're talking about it now. Senator Van Hollen of Maryland decided to go all the way down to El Salvador to visit an illegal criminal, probably domestic violence, wife-beating gangbanger who was also allegedly trafficking humans, because that's the hill that libs are going to die on. Justine, he did the meme. Everybody was making fun of it. We're just going to send libs down there and they're going to hold hands and have a romantic evening with this criminal gang member. And he actually did it. At some point, it feels like even making fun of them isn't is losing its fervor, right? I don't know. What's going on here?
It seems like every day is another Babylon Bee article to come to life. They look like gay lovers embracing one another. This this poor hostage, just an innocent Maryland man and father. This is what MSNBC and CNN have peddled. Actually, over 205 times they've used that phrase to describe him within the past first 2 weeks of April, and I believe in all over 500 times. Oh, who cares about the fact he may or may not have beaten his wife with a work boot, or that he's maybe a member of that MS-13, rape gang? Oh, no biggie. Just focus on the fact that, well, he is a father.
Yeah, a Maryland father. That's all he is. Pamela, so the interesting component of this right now is now the courts are saying, well, you got to facilitate his transfer back. But he's in the country illegally. Two, he's a citizen of El Salvador, and if El Salvador doesn't want to give him up, we're kind of in a bind here. Do you think that libs, especially after more and more and more is coming out about this particular individual, are going to stick to this? I think more Congress people are going down there. Is this going to be something that they're going to keep hammering, or are they finally going to go, yeah, maybe let's cut our losses?
I'm sure they're going to keep hammering it. They don't like to back off of a lot of things. This is peak Democrat. They're coddling criminals while ignoring victims like Rachel Warren. And, she was murdered in Van Hollen's own state. So I'm all about Christian value justice. I don't have sympathy for gangsters. And, his trip was not leadership. It's a disgrace, but that is what they like to do. They like to continue on with things that don't make sense to over half of us.
Yeah, taxpayer funded disgrace, by the way. That flight was funded by the US taxpayer. So there's also that. Speaking of libs kind of going off the rails, there was a big story that I'm sure all of you heard and everybody watching probably followed. Bill Maher, noted lib for a very, very long time, went and had dinner with President Trump, Kid Rock, Dana White, and a couple other people. He then came away with that experience going, President Trump seems actually like a much more normal guy than we all give him credit for. Now, while the libs could have taken that and gone, hey, maybe we should reform, instead, they doubled down. Larry David specifically, who is a guy I really like. I love the show Curb Your Enthusiasm. I'm sure a bunch of people watching out there really like Seinfeld and Curb and all of the stuff that Larry David's done. But Larry David wrote an article in the New York Times, a fictitious article piece saying called Larry David, My Dinner with Adolf, in which he goes to describe his make-believe dinner with Adolf Hitler, obviously comparing Bill Maher's dinner with Trump to him dining with Hitler. Justine, it seems like libs aren't going to learn from calling President Trump Hitler, and the fact that they're doubling down, even after one of their own vaunted intellectuals, Bill Maher, went like, yeah, kind of a nice guy, they're still continuing to double down. What's going on there?
Well, Larry should know this from Jew to Jew here. Here's just a little bit of advice for for Larry. He's a comedian, so he should know that material gets old really quickly. And this whole Nazi shtick, it's staler than a year-old bagel. Okay, I think Larry's. In fact, I think his Judaism really extends to just like the level of a bagel or just a every once in a while occasional matzo ball soup. He's culturally Jewish, and he believes being Jewish means supporting all these lefty causes, calling Trump a Nazi because, well, that sounds really grave and serious, and we can use our ancestral trauma to, go after our political opponents. While at the same time, he seems to say nothing about Hamas raping and butchering women. Oh, that's okay, if Hamas, God forbid, picked up his family members, he would probably just go,
Mhm.
well, well, we oppress them because we're white and Jewish.
Yeah, it is a ridiculous thing to say. And also too, him specifically, again, this is coming from a Larry David fan. If you remember when President Trump hosted SNL, Pamela, what was that, 2016, Larry David was in the audience making a joke with Hitler, apparently. You think he regrets that decision? If you don't know the clip, he yells, "Trump's a racist." I don't know. They gave me $500 and they told me to say this. Making a joke. Do you think he regrets that decision?
Oh, I'm sure. And I mean, let's be real. This is the theme so far of this entire show. They don't regret a lot of things. Um, and I think it's just going to be one of those things that the next 4 years, we're going to hear the same talking points over and over and over again. And I don't know how at this point they haven't gotten after this last election that maybe you should just say some things are good and disagree with others because it might just be another clean sweep in 3 years now at this point.
That's where I'm kind of like, yeah, let's let them continue saying the crazy things so long as it enables us to continue winning. Pamela, Justine, thanks so much. We'll be right back after the break to discuss whether or not parents have the right to opt their kids out of LGBTQ2 plus IA stuff. We'll also check in with Monica Page, Turning Point's White House correspondent, and also tomorrow night, Charlie Kirk and yours truly will be in College Station at Texas A&M. If you're in the area, would love to see you, and we'll also be airing that here on Turning Point tonight. We'll be right back after the break to discuss a bunch more of the news of the day. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this.